Hello everyone. In today's video, I thought we'd do something a little bit different. What I wanted to do is I wanted to assemble a single video that basically showed off all the different trainers that were available in Microsoft Flight Simulator, as well as kind of giving you some ideas between each one. When I started to sit down and realize and do this video, I was looking at a video that's potentially a really long video. So what I decided to do instead is just break it into a full series so you can kind of see each little plane individually. I'll make some comments on it, do a little bit of flying, kind of run it through basic flight training maneuvers, and kind of put some comments out. So the first aircraft we're going to be starting with in this series is going to be this lovely Cadet. This is a neat plane because it's just very different in a lot of ways. I mean, look out the window, you'll notice immediately we've got this cool little cranked wing, which is very unique. Fixed landing gear, if you're going to be a trainer, fixed landing gear are definitely going to be in your benefit. I love the fact that like the ailerons and the flaps are something you can just look out the window and you can just pick them out immediately. You also have that half drooped flap that's kind of built right into the wing, which I find very interesting, the straight aileron. I love the fact that it's a two-seater, which is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because two-seaters generally are a little bit easier to fly because they're just lighter and there's a lot less going on. That also means you're a little underpowered and slow, but it's a different issue. So what we're going to be doing in this series as well as in this video is we're going to be taking a look at each one of these aircraft, like I said, walking you through a bunch of different maneuvers with the aircraft, and I'll just make some kind of comments for when you're deciding which one of these aircraft is going to make most sense for you when you begin your flight training. So the first thing I want to do is just think about procedures. I'm brand new to flying. I get inside this plane, I plop my hand down. The first thing I do is I reach over for the stick and I wiggle it back and forth, and I'm super excited because this aircraft is a center stick left throttle. You could reach over and grab this one, of course, but this is the only aircraft of this entire series we're going to look at that is center stick left throttle. You're almost never in existence going to see this arrangement on account of the fact that this is usually reserved for military aircraft. It's actually amazing to see this even in any sort of plane, much less a trainer aircraft like the one we have here. So now that we take a look at that, let's go just procedurally. So the first thing we need to do here is, this makes me a little crazy, but you have this little thing for fuel. This is off, this is on. Notice when it's off, you can't actually push the starter button. I think that's a neat little touch there. When we go switch over here, you'll notice I got my little pitch trim. It shows exactly the position, which is huge because if you do some calculations and it says, oh, you want to go ahead and put it in this particular slot. Okay, that's fine. So we go ahead and pop it in that particular position. This is a great thing for new pilots to make it easier to see what trim position they are. The next thing we're going to look at is procedurally is like, what do we do to get this thing started? Well, looking down here, we got our battery and alternator. We have our switch. I click it to both, but there's no start setting here. The reason there's no start setting is the start button is this little red guy right here. It's actually different. The other thing we got to watch out for is this can be a problem for some people, but not others, is all these things are en français. They are not in regular old English here. So our anti-collision is actually what they call strobe lights. So in my case, I'm just going to turn on these two lights, just giving everybody a heads up that it's around. Now starting this thing, it's pretty easy peasy. If we needed to get a little bit of boost pressure, we could pop on the fuel pressure switch, kind of do a quick little priming action. I'll go ahead and shut that off. Mixture's already set. All we do is we basically reach down there. We press that button. So structurally, this is incredibly simple as far as learning to fly this plane. All I had to do is push a red button. I mean, the fuel literally won't let you start it. And to its credit, I love the fact that this aircraft has a simple fuel system. How simple, you say? Well, let's take a look. You have one fuel tank. That's it. You don't have any left-right business. You don't have the both. You don't have to do all the simulations or, oh, we're on the wrong fuel tank this whole time. None of that is even an issue in this airplane because of the fact that you've got the ability that only has a single fuel selector. Now, where this gets kind of interesting is in the US, usually you can't have that arrangement. It has to be left or right. It has to have some kind of mixing tank. So we turn that on. We get the airplane starting to warm up. Notice the presence of a carburetor temperature gauge here, but we don't have an easy way to go ahead and warm up the carburetor if we had carb ice kind of a problem. Engine anti, oh, there it is. Sorry about that. We normally pull this one out. We go ahead and get a huge increase in carburetor temperature. Like I said, I misspoke. Notice, by the way, from an ergonomic perspective, this knob is suspiciously like this knob, which could be a really big problem from a safety perspective, and that could definitely confuse, like I said, new people, as you noticed, that it confused me just a little bit just a moment ago. I love the fact that the fuel gauge is something that I probably have on a snowblower somewhere, but there's nothing wrong with that at all. Again, we've got 29 gallons in this thing. Instrumentation is relatively sparse, but it does follow the same standard 6 pattern here. You'll notice, by the way, that aircraft is slipping to the left. It's because we're on a hill, in case you were curious. But this is all the standard equipment. including, unfortunately, our little heading compass here, which is going to drift on us. That definitely will knock off some points as far as things go on. Speaking of instrumentation, take a look at the rest of the instrumentation here. You're going to notice that this is basically standard 6, which is great. Our only navigation instrument for electronic navigation is a single CDI right here. Now, this is a great tool. Now, by the way, how do we turn these things on? Click. That switch is usually for the purposes of the intercom system and other airplanes, but on this one, that's what turns on your avionics. We have a regular old Mode C transponder, which is really important, and we unfortunately only have 2 radios. Now, you're probably sitting here going, so? Well, anybody who's flown real planes will tell you having 2 sets of radios is great because you can use one radio to monitor ATIS, you can use it to monitor approach. Another radio we can use for different frequencies in order to triangulate our position in the air. Without that, you're going to be constantly juggling between different radio frequencies in order to get yourself safely where you need to go. That little level of complexity is not necessarily a bad thing because we've kept it simple here so our junior pilots has an easier time learning. But this is going to end up biting them in the long run because it's going to affect their workflow. Speaking of workflow, let's go ahead and taxi this thing out and see what it's like. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a little tiny bit of throttle. Real life airplanes, you generally just release the brakes and the thing starts rolling on you right away. One thing I noticed immediately is that it's a tremendously short turn radius. Now, from a turning aircraft perspective, if you're new to flying, it's nice when your aircraft is nice and sensitive in that sense. It is not nice when you're trying to have something that's got a big strong wind. So that's definitely something you're going to want to think about. One thing I will do, though, is because we have such a strong light behind us, so I'm actually going to turn on the brightness of the panel just a teeny tiny bit. The brightness of things actually can have a really big impact. You'll notice these are all light from above. They're not light from the instrument itself. That's actually not desirable if you're flying at night. It's always better when you have those little tiny instrument lights to, again, not have that little extra layer of something to not provide contrast for you. So the windsock, unfortunately, is absolutely worthless, so we're going to go ahead and take a runway 3 here. So I'm just going to come bouncing around. Again, its enhanced sensitivity would make it much, 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 much simpler as far as taxiing. That may be true if we weren't in a bad crosswind, however, where it can make things a little bit more exciting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and take off with this aircraft. We're going to do standard technique. We're not going to do anything fancy here. We're not going to do any short field, soft field, or anything like that. We can, of course, go into great detail as far as all those levels of flight training, but I'm not going to worry about that today because that's going to make it just a little bit more complicated than we need it to be. Go ahead and slow down. Now we're going to go to the little keyhole here. I love this thing. This is actually existing in the real world on this runway. To be honest, you don't need this keyhole if you're like a 172 or something like that. You just kind of go. So I'm going to go nice and wide. Remember, runway behind us is useless. Go ahead and kick it over one more time. This is a pretty short field, so we got to keep that in mind. Go ahead and hold the brakes here. We're going to go ahead and smoothly apply full throttle. It's coming. There we go. And we're off. So because this is such a lightweight trainer aircraft, we're off, finger quotes, really just means that we're inconveniencing things that are slow. Now, one thing I immediately noticed, and you probably caught that as well, is our airspeed indicator starts at the bottom and works its way up. Every airspeed indicator I've ever encountered in a plane before, it doesn't do that. Typically what the airspeed indicator will do is it'll start in the upper right corner and it'll swing down. Now this doesn't sound like it's big of an issue, but my brain is looking at that airspeed indicator and going, oh my god, I must be doing 145 knots right now. But the reality is if I actually zoom in on this thing, you'll see that I'm doing, let's call it 65 knots, which is incredibly slow, which brings us to the next point of this aircraft. What is this performance like? Well, I can tell you right now, I'm doing about 70 knots and I'm climbing at about 300 feet per minute. Now, I don't know about you, but 300 feet per minute is so slow, it puts me in danger of running into some of these mountains around us that are actually not that scary as far as altitude goes. So already that lack of performance could be very, very tricky. Now, imagine if we're out in Colorado where you have the high altitude, high temperatures during the summer. This plane would just be trying to get any form of altitude whatsoever. You know, there are very few planes that I know that climb this slow, but this one is definitely one of those. So what we're going to do now is go head over to the practice area and see what else we can find out about this plane. All right. Oh my gosh. That took a little while, but we've made it all the way over to our practice area, which we have this big reservoir here. So in the event that we crash, we go into water or the woods instead of, civilians or anything like that. So I got to say, that took a very long time. Basically, my entire flight, if I look out the back, can't see out the back of this plane. That was a long flight to get to this location. And again, it doesn't use a lot of fuel, so at least there's that. Actually, if you take a look real quick, I've been at full throttle the whole time. I'm already down to 90 96% of my fuel. So yeah, oh boy. So it's not as efficient on the gas as I was hoping it would be. So now that we're up at this altitude, we can go ahead and do a couple basic maneuvers. I'm going to go ahead and apply some trim here. The trim on this aircraft is not too bad. Some of these trims are really, really sensitive and twitchy. This one is not, which is actually awesome. When you're trying to learn how to fly a plane, you want the trim to be slow. If people with fast trim, you can deal with that on the airliners. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hold the throttle forward all the way, which is what we're doing right now, and we're just going to see how fast we can get this airplane too. So I'm going to go ahead and do just a teeny tiny bit of adjustments to my trim here just to keep things smooth. And I'm indicating, looks like about 100 knots wide open throttle. Keep in mind, you can't fly an airplane at wide open throttle. You can only fly it at partial throttle. It honestly feels a little bit like I've left the speed brakes out or something like that. But again, that's not a problem if you just learned the basics. Speaking of the basics, let's go ahead and try it in a steep turn. So we're going to go ahead and tip the nose over a little bit. We're going to pull it right to the 60, and we're going to give it a little tug here. Holy smokes, this is a relaxed steep turn. I am like pulling back like an inch here. I'm not even having to work for this. Usually it's like a constant battle of going up and down and tilting and not tilting and then tilting and then tilting and then not tilting. But I am putting basically no pressure on the controls, and now we're coming right back up to where we started at north. We didn't gain basically too much altitude. That was excellent. That maneuver was much simpler than it usually is in aircraft where you really got to pull back. Next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and test out a stall. I will do both kinds of stalls here. Go ahead and slow this plane down. I noticed I pull the throttle. It takes a little while to start slowing down. Get ourselves into the white arc. We're going to go ahead and bop our flaps all the way down. Remember, we've got that cool handle that we lift up to go ahead and bring those flaps down. We're doing our approach stall first. So we're just going to hold the nose up, and we're going to wait for the plane to stop flying. We're indicating 60 knots. Oh, boy. Oh, hello. Good morning. You're going to... Whoa, departure! Oh, that's not good. Oh, my. I was not expecting that to be that aggressive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do that again, but this time what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to use a little bit more right foot. That wasn't good. That was actually really dangerous. And it drops the left wing again. Oh my. Okay, I was not expecting it to be that rough, and I just lost 200 feet. I am quick on a stall, especially in the real plane, but that is intense. Let me put a little right turn to it and see if the stall does the same thing. There's a better stall. Oh, it just doesn't want to do it, and there's a secondary stall. Ooh, that is dangerous. Ooh, I wonder how bad it really is. Let's go ahead and try it with a departure stall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring up my flaps there. I'm going to go ahead and apply full throttle. I'm going to go lift the nose up, and we're just going to pretend we're climbing to the moon here. I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of left foot, a little bit of right foot, and I'm just going to try to keep the ball as centered as possible. Okay, that's not so bad. Listen to the sound. We're totally stalled, and I can't pull myself out of it. Oh, no! There we go. Oh! Sorry for the sound effects, folks. This thing that is not safe. That is very dangerous. You know, if you're trying to learn to fly a plane and that happens to you, your initial instinct is basically going to be exactly what I did. Let's go ahead and see what happens if you put it into a spin. A little bit of right foot, a little bit of left foot, a little bit of left foot, and right foot. Is it going to spin? Nah. Of course, when does it spin? It spins when we have the flaps down. So I'm not going to lie. The little maneuver, our steep turns, man, that was glorious in this plane. But those stalls were dangerous. They were not quick. They were very violent. They dumped the plane down. They were very difficult to fly out of. If you held the elevator all the way back, you basically would pull yourself into a secondary stall that instantly spun the plane. That's terrifying. I don't know if that's how the real plane is, but you're gonna mentally you're losing points here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come take us back from which we came, and we're going to go ahead and land this plane, and we're going to go ahead and see what it's like to try to put it on the ground. All right, we've got ourselves all ready to go, and this nice left downwind from which we came, Simsbury Airport. Altitude's just a tiny bit on the low side, but we're basically going to try this thing out and see what it's like. You'll probably observe we got a good bout of turbulence here. We also have a pretty solid crosswind, so that's going to be a pretty good way to evaluate the efficiency of this aircraft. All right, we're going to go ahead and pop down that first couple notches of flaps. We'll treat it kind of like a Cherokee. I'll let the nose come down just a tiny bit, and this is a pretty small runway, so we kind of really keep an eye on it. Give myself just a little bit of throttle as we kind of come drifting. Oh boy, that crosswind's going to be interesting. I'll get a little bit lower. All right, we're on the 45. We'll go ahead and take that left turn. Coordinating this thing is a little tricky. It really takes very little rudder in order to get it to go where you want. Now I'm going to go right from base to final here, and we're going to go ahead and pop in that last notch of flaps just to kind of get this thing nice and slow. Looking out the window, there's a lovely runway 3. So one thing I notice is it's very, very sensitive, like really, really sensitive, especially when you start getting a little on the fast side. All right, we'll pull that nose up. That's looking pretty good. We got about 1.3. I've got a little warning on the stall, which means I'm getting pretty darn close to my minimum speed here, running about 60 knots. That's about 60 right there, getting a little bit closer. I'll go ahead and coast it in like we do a 172. I'll lift that nose up. We'll have to get our wings nice and flat. And there's the ground effect. That is the one downside of a low wing. Pretty smooth, though. I'm going to hold the brakes. The brakes are pretty good. They're not ridiculously good. They're just pretty good. Go ahead and put this thing in a nice little donut, and we'll head back from which we came. So what are my final comments on this aircraft? Well, let's take a look. So my final comments on this aircraft kind of go like this. Positives. Ground handling is great. It's economical. We don't have a really big fuel tank on this thing. It's pretty good mileage. Simple fuel system. The visibility is great out the window, except out the back. The avionics, super simple. Again, you're not going to stress out. There's nothing too weird or anything about that. Our instruments are standard, which means we don't have anything weird. Like sometimes you get on a 152 where it'd be like on the opposite side of the channel or something like that. Yes, that's me holding a joystick to make it do this. Very responsive. I found the aircraft to be very, very sensitive. The turning on this was spectacular. I really had very, very little difficulty controlling this thing when it came to trying to get out. On the negative sides, the stall is dangerous. It's flat out deadly dangerous. If you stall this aircraft at low altitude, I don't know that I can help you. I couldn't recover even when I caught it early. That was dangerous. The climb is very slow. Even if you try to use its VY value, you'd be lucky if you get 500 feet per minute. Keep in mind we're at standard conditions here if you're curious. The cruise is slow. I indicated 100 knots at full throttle, which again, you're not cross-countrying very easily in a plane like this. You don't have a lot of electronic navigation. Again, you don't have that second set of radios. You don't have a GPS, nothing along those lines. And lastly, you have a pretty limited range. If you want to take a look at our entire flight here, we'll go ahead and share that with you real fast. Okay, not a real number. So that got interesting, but I'd be curious if that's more of a flight simulator glitch. But we did burn a significant amount of fuel. So hopefully you found this video interesting. Like I said, I intend to do a series of these and kind of provide you with all sorts of different aircraft sort of backgrounds, kind of handling characteristics. So when you're picking the one you want to stick to when it comes to training in flight sim, you can make the right choice. Enjoy.